Welcome to the news but happy. It's the news but happy. Senator Durbin blocks legislation that would strengthen sentences for child porn offenders. Dated April 5, 2022 by Joseph Lord. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, on Tuesday blocked legislation in the Senate that would have strengthened penalties for child porn possession, saying the bill, quote, doesn't reflect the realities of today, end quote. The legislation, put forward by Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri, and co-sponsored by Senators Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, and Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, comes after weeks of heated debate over Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson's track record in sentencing child porn offenders. After one such debate in the Senate Judiciary Committee, Durbin, who chairs the committee, said that the Senate had been derelict in its duty to update child porn law, which was originally designed to deal with physical images rather than digital ones. Quote, I hope you will agree we all want to do everything within our power to lessen incidents of child pornography and exploitation, end quote, Durbin said last week. Quote, I want to tell you, Congress doesn't have clean hands. We haven't touched this now for 15, 16, or 17 years, end quote. Side note, that would make the law an adult. Back to the article. Durbin added that Congress had shown, quote, inattention and unwillingness to tackle an extremely controversial issue, end quote. Side note, I don't know why prosecuting child pornography is a controversial issue. Back to the article. Quote, I don't know if you've introduced a bill to change this. I'll be looking for it, end quote, Durbin told Hawley. Quote, if we're going to tackle it, we should, end quote. Referencing that interaction, Hawley said on the Senate floor Tuesday, quote, I agree 100%. I agree we should tackle it. This is the time to tackle it, and I'm here to do that today, end quote. In 2003, Congress passed legislation instituting mandatory minimum sentencing for child porn offenders. In a controversial decision, the Supreme Court in United States v. Booker struck down the mandatory minimum laws, which bind judges' hands, as unconstitutional. Hawley's bill would reinstate those mandatory minimums, requiring that those convicted of child porn possession receive at least 5 years in federal prison. Quote, restore the law back to what Congress intended back in 2003, end quote, Hawley said. Despite his calls last week for Congress to consider the issue legislatively, Durbin on Tuesday blocked Hawley's bill. Quote, I have to ask myself, why now? End quote, Durbin said in his objection, reporting comments allegedly made by the U.S. Sentencing Commission, on which Judge Jackson served for several years. Durbin said, quote, these guidelines, side note, imposed by the 2003 legislation, and side note, don't reflect the reality of today. Durbin added, quote, the laws were written in an era where the materials we're talking about were physical materials, and we now live in a world of internet and access to tens of thousands of images if that is your decision. There are some political groups, at least one well-known political group, that manufactures theories about child pornography and pedophilia and the like, and even inspires deadly reactions to them, and they're cheering this on, end quote, Durbin said in an oblique reference to QAnon, an online group that says that high-level government and Hollywood officials are involved in a major sex trafficking ring. Following the exchange, Hawley took to Twitter to criticize Durbin's response to the legislation. Quote, I just went to the Senate floor to try to pass a bill toughening sentences on child pornographers, end quote, Hawley said in a tweet following the objection. Quote, and the Democrats blocked it, again calling the child porn crisis a conspiracy theory. And that tells you everything you need to know, end quote. The issue first arose in a March 16th Twitter thread posted by Hawley. In the thread, he alleged that Jackson has a, quote, alarming pattern, end quote, of leniency in sentencing those in possession, of child porn. Since then, it has been a key issue for Republicans, many of whom have highlighted the controversy to show that Jackson is, quote, soft on crime, end quote. According to Senator Cruz on March 22nd, Jackson gave 47.2% less time behind bars than prosecutors asked for. So less than half, boys and girls. I'm sorry, that was a side note. I shouldn't have said that. Cruz and other Republicans have also noted that in every child porn case in which she had some discretion, Jackson sentenced below federal guidelines and prosecutor requests. Quote, while the White House continues to dismiss concerns about leniency toward child porn offenders as a, quote, desperate conspiracy theory, end quote, the numbers speak for themselves, end Hawley's quote. Hawley said in a March 29th statement on the bill, quote, Congress must act before this problem becomes even worse, end quote. Remember to like and subscribe for more news. It's the news, but happy.